Sarah worked at a small diner called Sunshine Cafe on the corner of Main Street. She was 28 years old with brown hair that she always tied back when she worked. Every day, she served food to many people who came and went. Some were nice, and some were not so nice. But Sarah always smiled and did her job well. It was a cold Tuesday evening in October. The sky was turning dark, and fewer people were coming into the diner. Sarah looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost time to close. As she wiped the counter clean, she looked out the big front window and saw a man sitting on a bench across the street. The man wore an old torn coat that seemed too thin for the cold weather. His shoes had holes in them, and next to him was a small bag with all his things. He was an older black man with gray hair and a beard. Sarah had seen him before in this area, but never really paid much attention. Tonight was different, though. As the wind blew harder outside, Sarah watched the man pull his coat tighter around himself. He looked cold and hungry. "Who are you looking at?" asked Betty, the cook who had worked at the diner for 20 years. "That man across the street," Sarah said. "He's been sitting there for hours." Betty looked out the window and shook her head. "He's there most days. Poor soul. Life can be hard sometimes." Sarah nodded and continued cleaning up. As she worked, she kept glancing at the man. There was something about his eyes that caught her attention. Even from across the street, she could see they were kind eyes, not angry or mean like some people might expect. When it was time to close, Betty threw away the leftover food like she always did. But today, Sarah stopped her. "Wait," Sarah said. "Can I take some of that?" Betty raised an eyebrow. "What for?" I want to give it to that man outside. He looks hungry." Betty smiled slowly. "Good girl. Take this chicken sandwich too. It's fresh from an order that was never picked up." Sarah packed up a chicken sandwich, some apple pie, and a cup of hot coffee. She put them in a paper bag and walked out of the diner after her shift ended. Her heart beat a little faster as she crossed the street. She had never done this before. The man looked up as Sarah approached. Up close, she could see the lines on his face that told of a life that had not been easy. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. "I work at the diner across the street. I brought you some food, if you'd like it." The man looked surprised. His eyes widened slightly as he looked from Sarah to the bag in her hands. "That's for me?" he asked. His voice was deep and clear, not what Sarah expected. "Yes," she said, holding the bag out. "It's still warm." Slowly, the man took the bag. He opened it, and the smell of warm food came out. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Thank you, miss," he said. "My name is James." "I'm Sarah," she replied. James took a small bite of the sandwich and smiled. It was a warm smile that made his whole face light up. "This is the best thing I've had in days," he said honestly. Sarah found herself smiling back. "I'm glad you like it." Instead of walking away, Sarah surprised herself by sitting down on the bench, leaving some space between them. "Do you come here often?" she asked. James nodded. "It's a good spot. People are kinder here than in other parts of town." As they talked, Sarah learned that James had been on the streets for 2 years. He didn't explain why, and she didn't ask. But he spoke well and had good manners. He thanked her several times for the food. When Sarah finally said goodbye and stood to leave, James looked up at her. "You're a good person, Sarah," he said. "Not many people would stop and talk to someone like me." Sarah felt a strange mix of happiness and sadness. "I'll see you around, James," she said. As she walked home that night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the man on the bench. There was something about him she couldn't quite figure out. Something that made her feel like there was more to his story than what met the eye. The next day, Sarah looked for James during her shift. She spotted him on the same bench around dinner time. Without thinking twice, she packed some fresh soup and bread that Betty had made too much of that day. "Going to see your friend again?" Betty asked with a kind smile. Sarah nodded. "Yes, there's something about him, Betty. He doesn't seem like he belongs on the streets. After her shift ended, Sarah crossed the street with the warm food. James looked up, and his face brightened when he saw her. "Hello again," he said. "I didn't expect to see you today." "I brought you some soup," Sarah said, sitting down beside him. "It's cold out here." James accepted the food with thanks. As he ate, Sarah noticed his hands. They were rough from the outdoor life he now lived, but his fingers were long and moved with a strange grace. They were not the hands of someone who had done hard labor all his life. "Have you always lived in this town?" Sarah asked. James shook his head. "No, I traveled a lot when I was younger. I've been to almost every state in America." "Really? What for?" Sarah was curious now. James paused, as if deciding how much to share. "I was a musician. I played piano in many places." "That's amazing. What kind of music did you play?" "Jazz mostly. Some blues." James smiled at a memory. Those were good days. Over the next few weeks, Sarah made it a habit to bring James food whenever she worked. Sometimes it was just coffee and a sandwich. Other times it was a full meal. They would sit and talk for a while each time. One evening, it started to rain just as Sarah was bringing James some food. "We can't sit out here today," she said. "Come inside the diner. It's almost closing time anyway." James looked unsure. "I don't know if that's a good idea. People might not want someone like me in there." "Nonsense," Sarah said firmly. "Betty won't mind. And there's hardly anyone else there now." Inside the diner, Betty welcomed James with a warm smile. She even made him a fresh cup of coffee. James sat in a corner booth, looking a bit nervous at first, but soon he relaxed. Sarah noticed that when James spoke about music, his eyes lit up. He told stories about famous jazz clubs in New Orleans and Chicago. He talked about musicians with names Sarah had heard of, claiming he had played with some of them. "Did you ever make records?" Sarah asked. A shadow passed over James's face. "Yes, a few. Long time ago now." "What happened? Why did you stop playing?" Sarah asked gently. James looked down at his hands. "Life happened. My wife got sick. Medical bills piled up. Then she passed away 5 years ago. After that, nothing seemed to matter much. I made some bad choices. Lost my house. Lost touch with friends and family." Sarah felt her heart ache for him. "Do you have any family now?" "Children. A son," James said after a long pause. "He's successful. A doctor in the city. But we haven't spoken in years. Why not reach out to him?" Sarah suggested. James shook his head. "Too much pride, I guess. Too much shame. How do you tell your son you failed so badly?" As closing time came, James thanked Sarah and Betty for their kindness. Before leaving, he paused by the old piano in the corner of the diner that was mostly used for decoration now. "May I?" he asked quietly. Betty nodded, curious. James sat down and placed his fingers on the keys. Then magic happened. The most beautiful music filled the diner. James played a soft jazz melody that made Sarah and Betty stand still in wonder. His fingers moved over the keys like they belonged there. For a moment, James wasn't a homeless man anymore. He was an artist. When he finished playing, there were tears in Betty's eyes. Sarah couldn't speak. "Thank you," James said, standing up. That felt good. As he walked back into the cold night, Sarah watched him go. Now she knew there was much more to James than met the eye. 3 months passed. Sarah and James had become good friends. She learned that his full name was James Johnson. He had traveled all over America in the 1980s and 1990s playing piano with different jazz groups. He had been married for 30 years to a woman named Eleanor before she died from cancer. "She was the love of my life," James told Sarah one cold evening as they sat inside the diner. "When she got sick, I spent everything we had trying to save her. But it wasn't enough." Sarah could see the pain in his eyes when he talked about Eleanor. She also noticed that James never mentioned his son beyond saying he was a doctor named Marcus. It seemed to hurt him too much to talk about. One Tuesday in December, it snowed heavily. Sarah worried about James all day. When she finished her shift, she packed extra food and a thick blanket she had brought from home. But when she went to look for James, he wasn't at his usual spot. Maybe he found somewhere warmer to stay, Betty suggested when Sarah returned to the diner looking worried. The next day, James wasn't there either, or the day after that. A week passed with no sign of him. "I'm really worried, Betty," Sarah said. "What if something happened to him?" "You could check the hospitals," Betty suggested, "or the homeless shelters downtown." On her day off, Sarah did just that. She visited 3 hospitals, asking if they had admitted a man named James Johnson. At the first 2 places, no one could help her. At the 3rd hospital, the woman at the front desk checked her computer. "Johnson James," she said, looking at her screen. "Yes, he was brought in last week. Collapsed on Pine Street." Sarah's heart jumped. "Is he okay? Can I see him?" "Are you family?" the woman asked. "No, I'm a friend." The woman looked unsure. "Only family is allowed right now. He's in the intensive care unit." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Please, he doesn't have family here. At least, I don't think he does. He's been alone for so long." The woman's face softened. "Wait here. Let me talk to the nurse in charge." Sarah sat in the waiting room for what felt like hours. Finally, a nurse came out to speak with her. "You're here for Mr. Johnson?" she asked. Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes. Is he going to be okay?" "He had a heart attack," the nurse explained. "It was serious, but he's stable now. When they brought him in, he had nothing but the clothes on his back and a piece of paper with your name and the diner's address. He's been asking for you." Sarah felt a mix of relief and worry. "Can I see him?" The nurse nodded. "Just for a few minutes. And there's something else you should know. We managed to contact his son. He's flying in from Chicago tomorrow." Sarah was led through white hallways to a room where James lay in a hospital bed. He looked smaller somehow, with tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His eyes were closed. "James," Sarah said softly. His eyes opened slowly, then widened when he saw her. "Sarah, you found me." Sarah moved to his bedside and gently took his hand. "Of course I did. I was so worried about you." James smiled weakly. "Can't get rid of an old man that easily." "The nurse told me they contacted your son," Sarah said. James's face showed a mix of emotions: fear, hope, shame. "Marcus?" "Yes, I gave them his number finally. I wasn't sure he would come." "Of course he'll come," Sarah assured him, though she couldn't be certain. "He's your son." "I haven't seen him in 8 years, James admitted. "Not since Eleanor's funeral. We had a big fight. I said things I shouldn't have. Then I lost everything and was too proud to ask for help." Sarah squeezed his hand. "This is a chance to make things right." James looked at her with tired eyes. "What if he hates me? What if he takes one look at what I've become and walks away?" "He won't," Sarah said firmly. "You're his father." A nurse came in to say that visiting time was over. Sarah promised to return the next day. As she left the hospital, she wondered about Marcus Johnson. What kind of man was he? Would he be kind like his father or bitter about the years of separation? Sarah hardly slept that night. She kept thinking about James, alone in the hospital, waiting for a reunion that might break his heart. The next morning, Sarah went to work with a heavy heart. She told Betty about finding James in the hospital. "Poor man," Betty said. "At least he's getting proper care now." "His son is coming today," Sarah said as she tied her apron. "I'm going to visit after my shift." The diner was busy that day. Sarah moved from table to table, taking orders and serving food. But her mind kept drifting to James. She wondered if Marcus had arrived yet. What was happening at the hospital? At 3 o'clock, The lunch rush was over, and the diner became quiet. Sarah was wiping tables when the front door opened. A tall, well-dressed black man walked in. He wore an expensive coat and carried a leather briefcase. He looked around the diner with careful eyes. Sarah approached him. "Can I help you?" The man studied her face. "Are you Sarah?" Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "Yes, that's me." "My name is Marcus Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I believe you know my father." Sarah shook his hand. "Yes, I do. Please, have a seat. Would you like some coffee?" Marcus sat in a booth by the window, the same one where James had sat that rainy evening when he played the piano. "Coffee would be great. Thank you." Sarah brought 2 cups and sat across from him. Betty gave her a nod, silently telling her to take her time. Marcus looked to be in his 40s. He had the same kind eyes as James, but his face showed no signs of the hard life his father had lived. He was handsome and carried himself with confidence. "I just came from the hospital," Marcus said. "My father told me about you, how you've been feeding him and talking with him." "James is a good man," Sarah said simply. "I enjoyed his company." Marcus looked down at his coffee. "I haven't seen my father in 8 years. The last time was at my mother's funeral. We argued. He was grieving and angry. I was too. We both said terrible things." "He mentioned that," Sarah said gently. "I tried to find him for years," Marcus continued. "He just disappeared. I hired private investigators. Nothing. Then yesterday I get a call saying he's homeless and had a heart attack." Sarah could see the pain and guilt in Marcus's eyes. "He was too proud to reach out," Sarah said. "He told me that. He didn't want you to see him like this." Marcus shook his head. "All these years, I'm a doctor, you know. I help people every day. But I couldn't help my own father because I couldn't find him. And all this time, he was sitting on a bench across from a diner." "How is he doing?" Sarah asked. "Better. They're moving him out of intensive care tomorrow. The doctors say he'll recover, but he needs proper care. Good food, warmth, medication." "What will happen to him now?" Sarah asked the question that had been worrying her. Marcus looked at her directly. "I want him to come live with me in Chicago. I have plenty of room." But he's refusing. Sarah was surprised. "Why?" "Pride again. He says he doesn't want charity from me. Says he's made his own choices and will live with them." Marcus sounded frustrated. "That's actually why I came to find you. He listens to you. Maybe you could talk to him." Sarah agreed to try. After her shift ended, she and Marcus went to the hospital together. In the car, Marcus told her more about James's past. "My father wasn't just any musician," he explained. "He was James Magic Fingers Johnson. He recorded with some of the greatest jazz players of his time. He was famous in music circles." Sarah was shocked. "I had no idea. After my mother got sick, he spent everything on treatments. When she died, he fell apart. Started drinking. I tried to help, but he pushed everyone away. Classic depression. I see it in my patients all the time. But when it's your own father." At the hospital, James's face brightened when he saw Sarah. Then he noticed Marcus behind her, and his expression became guarded. "You two have met," he said. "Yes," Sarah replied, sitting beside his bed. "Marcus came to the diner looking for me." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Sarah could feel the weight of 8 years of separation between father and son. "Dad," Marcus finally said, "please come stay with me, just until you're back on your feet." James looked away. "I told you, I don't need." "James," Sarah interrupted gently, "sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help." James looked at her, then at his son. Sarah saw something change in his eyes, a softening, a surrender of pride. "Okay," he said quietly, "but just until I'm better. Then we'll see." Marcus's face filled with relief. Sarah watched as father and son began the slow process of finding their way back to each other. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. 2 weeks passed. James stayed in the hospital while his heart grew stronger. Sarah visited him every day after work. Sometimes Marcus was there too, and Sarah could see the two men slowly rebuilding their relationship. They were careful with each other, like people walking on thin ice, but each day brought more relaxed conversations. One afternoon, Sarah arrived to find James sitting up in bed, looking better than he had in days. "Good news," he told her with a smile. "Doctor says I can leave tomorrow." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, taking her usual seat beside his bed. "Are you going to Chicago with Marcus?" James nodded. "Yes, just for a while, until I'm stronger. Marcus has a guest room all ready for me." Sarah felt happy for James, but she also realized she would miss their talks. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Marcus is arranging everything." James reached out and took Sarah's hand. "I want to thank you, Sarah. You saved my life." "Don't be silly," Sarah said, feeling embarrassed. "I just brought you some food." "You did much more than that," James insisted. "You saw me as a person when most people only saw a homeless man. You gave me dignity, and if you hadn't found me at the hospital, I might never have reconnected with my son." Sarah felt tears in her eyes but blinked them away. "I'm going to miss you, James." "This isn't goodbye," James said firmly. "I'll be back to visit, and Marcus gave me a cell phone. Can you believe it? An old man like me with a fancy phone." They both laughed, and the mood lightened. James told Sarah about Marcus's house in Chicago, with its big rooms and garden. He seemed both excited and nervous about this new chapter in his life. "There's something else," James said after a while. "Marcus told me there's a piano in his house. He asked if I would play again." "Will you?" Sarah asked, remembering the beautiful music James had created on the old diner piano. "I think I will," James said thoughtfully. "It's been too long." The next day, Sarah went to the hospital after her morning shift to say goodbye. When she arrived at James's room, she found him dressed in new clothes, a warm sweater, clean pants, and good shoes. Marcus must have brought them for him. James looked like a different person. "Look at you," Sarah said, smiling. "So handsome." James laughed, a bit embarrassed. "These old bones clean up okay, I guess." Marcus arrived soon after, carrying a small suitcase. "All set, Dad. The car is waiting downstairs." James nodded. "Just need a minute to say goodbye to Sarah." Marcus gave them some privacy, stepping out into the hallway. Sarah tried to keep smiling, but suddenly found it hard. "Here," James said, pressing something into her hand. "I want you to have this." Sarah looked down. It was an old, worn jazz record. The cover showed a much younger James sitting at a piano, surrounded by other musicians. The title read, "Magic Fingers Johnson and the Blue Note Quartet." "James," Sarah gasped, "this is you." "My first album," James said proudly. "One of the nurses found it online and ordered it for me. Can you believe people still remember my music?" Sarah held the record carefully. "This is precious. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," James said. "A small thank you for all you've done." They hugged goodbye, and Sarah promised to call soon. As she watched James leave with Marcus, she didn't feel sad anymore. Instead, she felt hopeful. James was getting a second chance at life and family. Back at the diner, Sarah showed Betty the record. "Well, Betty said, studying the cover. "Our James was famous. We should play this record sometime." Sarah placed the record carefully in her bag. "I think James has a lot more music left in him. This is just the beginning." That night at home, Sarah put on the record and listened to James play. The music was beautiful, full of life, sorrow, and hope, just like James himself. As the notes filled her small apartment, Sarah thought about how a simple act of kindness had changed not just James's life, but hers too. She had offered food to a hungry man, never expecting anything in return. Instead, She had gained a friend, learned a powerful lesson about looking beyond appearances, and played a part in reuniting a father and son. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the smallest actions could create the biggest changes. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Sarah wondered what the future would hold for James. She had a feeling that his story was far from over. A month passed since James left for Chicago. Sarah kept busy with work at the diner, but she missed her friend. They talked on the phone once a week. James was getting stronger every day, he told her. The doctors were happy with his progress. Marcus has been wonderful, James said during one call. His house is too big and fancy for my taste, but the guest room is comfortable. Have you played the piano? Sarah asked. There was a pause before James answered. A little. It feels strange after so long. My fingers are stiff. One cold January evening, Sarah's phone rang as she was getting ready for bed. It was Marcus. Sarah, I need your help, he said, sounding frustrated. It's Dad. He won't take his medication regularly. He barely touches the piano. Most days, he just sits and stares out the window. I think he's depressed. That doesn't sound like James, Sarah said, worried. He listens to you, Marcus continued. Would you consider coming to visit? Just for a weekend. I'll pay for your ticket. Sarah thought about it. She had never left her small town before. The idea of flying to Chicago was a little scary. But James needed her. I'll come, she decided. But I can pay for my own ticket. She had been saving money for years, though she rarely had a reason to spend it. 2 weeks later, Sarah took her first airplane ride. She was nervous at first, gripping the armrests during takeoff. But once they were in the air, she enjoyed looking down at the tiny houses and roads below. Marcus met her at the airport. As they drove to his house, Sarah was amazed by the tall buildings of Chicago. Everything seemed so big and busy compared to her small town. Marcus lived in a beautiful brick house with a neatly kept garden, now covered in snow. Inside, the rooms were large and filled with nice furniture. Sarah felt a little out of place in her simple clothes. Where's James? She asked, looking around. In the sunroom, Marcus said. He spends most of his time there. Sarah found James sitting in a comfortable chair by a large window, watching snow fall outside. He looked healthier than when she last saw him. He had gained some weight, and his face had more color, but his eyes seemed sad. When James saw Sarah, his whole face changed. His eyes lit up, and he smiled his warm smile. Sarah, he exclaimed, standing up to hug her. What are you doing here? I came to see how you're doing, Sarah said, hugging him back. And to see this fancy house Marcus keeps telling me about. James laughed. It is fancy, isn't it? Too fancy for an old man like me. Sarah spent the afternoon catching James up on all the news from the diner. Betty had hired a new waitress. The old coffee machine had finally broken down. Small stories that made James laugh. Later, when Marcus was making dinner, Sarah asked James to show her the piano. It's in the living room, James said, hesitating. But I don't play much these days. Why not? Sarah asked gently. James looked down at his hands. Those days are gone, Sarah. I'm not the man I was. Show me anyway, Sarah insisted. The piano was beautiful, black and shiny. It was much nicer than the old one in the diner. Sarah ran her fingers over the keys, making a jumble of notes. I never learned to play, she admitted. I always wished I could. James sat beside her on the bench. It's never too late to learn. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play a simple melody. This is how you start, he said. Sarah tried to copy him, laughing when she made mistakes. Soon, James was showing her more notes, explaining patiently when she got confused. From the doorway, Marcus watched them. He hadn't seen his father smile like that in weeks. Sarah had been there less than a day, and already she had done what doctors and medication couldn't do. She had brought back the spark in James's eyes. As they practiced together, James began to play more complicated pieces. His fingers moved faster, remembering old skills. The music filled the house, bright and beautiful. "There's the magic fingers I remember," Marcus said from the doorway. James looked up, surprised, then smiled at his son. Maybe there's some magic left after all. Sarah stayed in Chicago for a long weekend. By the time she left, James was playing the piano every day. He and Marcus seemed more comfortable with each other too. They argued less and laughed more. "Thank you," Marcus said as he drove Sarah to the airport. "You've done what no doctor could do." Sarah shook her head. James just needed a friend to remind him who he is. Back at the diner, life continued as usual. Sarah worked her shifts, talked to customers, and kept in touch with James by phone. His voice sounded stronger and happier each time they spoke. 2 months later, on a rainy April morning, the diner door opened and James walked in. Sarah almost dropped the coffee pot she was holding. "James," she cried, rushing over to hug him. "What are you doing here?" James looked healthy and well-dressed. His eyes were clear and bright. "I came to see my favorite waitress," he said with a smile, "and to thank Betty for all those meals." Betty came out from the kitchen and hugged James too. "Look at you," she said, stepping back to admire him. "All fancy and healthy." "Marcus is with me," James explained. "He's at a medical conference in the city for a few days. I decided to come along." Sarah couldn't stop smiling. She had missed James more than she realized. During her break, they sat in the same booth by the window where they had shared so many conversations before. "How are things in Chicago?" Sarah asked. "Good," James said. "Really good. I've been playing piano again. Not just at home, but at a small jazz club near Marcus's house." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're performing again?" James nodded, looking proud. "Just one night a week. The owner is an old friend who remembered me from the old days. The audience is small, but they seem to enjoy the music." "That's wonderful, James." "There's more," James continued. "A record company heard about me playing again. They want to release some of my old recordings. They're calling it The Return of Magic Fingers Johnson." Sarah clapped her hands together. "James, that's amazing. It's a small company, nothing fancy, but it feels good to know people still care about my music." James paused, then added, "I want you to come to my next show in Chicago as my special guest." "Me? But I don't know anything about jazz." "You don't need to. Music is for everyone." James took her hand. "Please say yes. I wouldn't be playing again if not for you." Sarah agreed. The following month, she took another trip to Chicago. This time, she wasn't nervous about the flight or the big city. She was excited. Marcus picked her up from the airport and drove her to his house. On the way, he told her how much James had improved. "He practices every day," Marcus said. "Some of his old music friends have been calling. Word is spreading that Magic Fingers Johnson is back." At the house, James was waiting with a surprise. He had bought Sarah a new dress to wear to his show. It was dark blue and elegant, unlike anything Sarah had ever owned. "I can't accept this," she protested. "Of course you can," James insisted. "Every special guest needs a special outfit." That night, Marcus drove them to a small jazz club called the Blue Note. A sign outside read, "Tonight, the return of Magic Fingers Johnson." Inside, the club was packed with people. A small stage held a piano, a drum set, and microphones. The audience was a mix of young and old, all there to hear James play. When it was time, James walked onto the stage. The crowd cheered. He looked different up there, taller somehow, more confident. He sat at the piano and adjusted the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he said. "It's good to be back. Tonight, I want to dedicate my first song to someone special. Her name is Sarah, and she reminded me who I am when I had forgotten." James began to play. The music was beautiful, flowing from his fingers like water. Sarah had never heard anything like it. The song seemed to tell a story. Her story and James's story of friendship, kindness, and second chances. When the song ended, the audience erupted in applause. James stood and bowed, then pointed to Sarah in the audience. Everyone turned to look at her, clapping. Sarah felt her face get hot, but she smiled and waved. After the show, many people came to speak with James. Some were old fans who remembered him from years ago. Others were young musicians who admired his work. James introduced Sarah to everyone, proudly calling her the woman who saved Magic Fingers Johnson. 6 months passed. James's music career continued to grow. His old recordings were released and sold well. He played regularly at jazz clubs in Chicago and even went on a small tour to nearby cities. He called Sarah every Sunday to tell her about his week. One evening in October, James called outside their usual time. "Sarah, I have big news," he said, sounding excited. "I'm organizing a charity concert. It's called the Concert for Hope. All the money will go to helping homeless people." "That's wonderful, James," Sarah said. "I want to hold it in our town," James continued. "Where it all began, where you found me on that bench." Sarah was surprised. "Here, but we don't have any big concert halls." "We don't need one. The high school has an auditorium. I've already talked to the principal, and I've invited some of my musician friends to play too. It's going to be special." The whole town was soon buzzing with news of the concert. Many people remembered James as the homeless man who sat on the bench across from the diner. Now they were amazed to learn he was a famous jazz pianist. Betty closed the diner for the day of the concert so everyone could attend. She even made special cookies for the reception afterward. The high school auditorium was filled with people from town and visitors from other places who had come to hear James play. Sarah sat in the front row next to Marcus, who had flown in for the event. James walked onto the stage wearing a neat black suit. He looked nothing like the homeless man Sarah had first met almost a year ago. He smiled at the crowd and sat at the piano. "Good evening," he said into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming to the Concert for Hope. Before we begin, I want to share a story with you." James told the audience about how he had lost everything after his wife died, how he had lived on the streets for years, too proud to ask for help, how a kind waitress had offered him food and friendship when he needed it most. "Many people are just one tragedy away from where I was," James said. "Tonight, we raise money to help those who need a second chance, just like I got." The concert was beautiful. James played with more heart and skill than Sarah had ever heard before. Other musicians joined him for some songs: a saxophone player, a drummer, a singer with a voice like honey. The audience clapped and cheered after each piece. Near the end of the show, James spoke into the microphone again. "I'd like to invite a special person to join me on stage. Sarah Martin, would you please come up here?" Sarah froze in her seat. Marcus nudged her gently. "Go on," he whispered. With shaky legs, Sarah walked up to the stage. James took her hand and led her to the microphone. "This is the woman who saved my life," he told the audience, "not with medicine or money, but with kindness and dignity. When others looked away, Sarah saw me as a person. She offered friendship when I needed it most." The audience applauded. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "I want to announce something special tonight," James continued. "With the money raised from this concert and donations from some generous sponsors, we are starting the Hope Foundation. We will open a center right here in town to help homeless people get back on their feet. It will provide food, shelter, medical care, and job training." The audience cheered and clapped. And James said, smiling at Sarah, "I'm pleased to announce that Sarah has agreed to run the day-to-day operations of the center." This was news to Sarah. She looked at James with surprise. "We haven't discussed this yet," James admitted with a laugh. "But I can't think of anyone better for the job. What do you say, Sarah? Will you help more people like you helped me?" Sarah thought about her life at the diner. She loved her job, but this was a chance to make a bigger difference. She leaned toward the microphone. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored." The audience erupted in applause. James hugged Sarah, and she could feel tears on his cheeks, or maybe they were her own. She couldn't tell. As she looked out at the audience, Sarah saw Betty wiping away tears and giving her a thumbs up. She saw Marcus nodding with approval. She saw her neighbors and customers from the diner, all cheering for her. A year ago, she had been just a waitress who offered a sandwich to a homeless man. Now she was about to start a new chapter in her life, helping others find their way back from the edge, just as James had done. 2 years had passed since Sarah first offered food to James on that cold autumn evening. So much had changed since then. The Hope Center had been open for a year and a half. It was located in an old building downtown that had been renovated with money from James's concerts and donations from people around the country who had heard his story. The center had beds for 20 people, a kitchen that served 3 meals a day, and rooms where people could learn new job skills. Sarah now worked at the center full-time. She had left her job at the diner, though she still visited Betty almost every day. Betty often made extra food to bring to the center. James divided his time between Chicago and the small town. He had bought a small house not far from the center. When he was in town, he taught music classes at the center. Several homeless people had discovered they had musical talents they never knew about. One spring morning, Sarah arrived at the center early. She unlocked the front door and checked the schedule for the day. James was arriving that afternoon to give a special concert for the center's residents. As Sarah prepared for the day, she heard the bell over the door ring. She looked up and saw a young woman standing there. She was thin and looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. She carried a small bag with all her belongings. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked gently. "I was told I could get a meal here," the woman said quietly, "and maybe a place to stay for a night or two." "Of course," Sarah said. "What's your name?" "Lisa," the woman replied. Sarah showed Lisa where she could store her bag, then led her to the dining room where breakfast was being served. Lisa sat alone, eating slowly, keeping her eyes down. After breakfast, Sarah approached her again. "Lisa, would you like to stay for our music program this afternoon? We have a special guest coming to play piano." Lisa shrugged. "Maybe. I used to play piano as a kid." "Really?" Sarah smiled. "Our guest is a jazz pianist. His name is James Johnson." Lisa looked up with surprise. "Magic Fingers Johnson. My dad used to play his records all the time." "The very same," Sarah said. "He's a good friend and the reason this center exists." Later that day, James arrived. He hugged Sarah warmly. "How's my favorite center director?" "Busy as always," Sarah laughed. "We have a new guest who knows your music. Her name is Lisa." James sat up in the center's common room. Residents gathered to listen. Some who had been at the center for months, others who had just arrived. Lisa sat in the back, still looking unsure. Before playing, James told his story as he always did. He talked about losing everything, about living on the streets, about the waitress who showed him kindness. Some of the residents had heard the story before, but they never tired of it. It gave them hope that their lives could change too. "So remember," James said, "no matter how far you've fallen, you can find your way back. Sometimes all it takes is one person who sees you, really sees you, to help you remember who you are." As James played, Sarah watched Lisa. The young woman's eyes were fixed on James's hands as they moved across the piano keys. There was a spark of interest there, maybe even hope. After the performance, Lisa approached James shyly. "Your music is amazing," she said. "I used to play piano too, but I haven't touched one in years." James smiled at her. "Would you like to play now? The piano is all yours." Lisa hesitated, then sat down at the piano. Slowly, her fingers found the keys. She played a simple classical piece, making a few mistakes but continuing bravely. When she finished, everyone applauded. "You have talent," James told her. "If you want, I can teach you while I'm in town." For the first time, Lisa smiled. "I'd like that." That evening, after most residents had gone to bed, Sarah and James sat in her small office. Through the window, they could see the bench across the street where James had once sat as a homeless man. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if I hadn't brought you that sandwich?" Sarah asked. James followed her gaze to the bench. "All the time. One small act of kindness changed everything. For me, for Marcus, for all the people we help here. And now maybe for Lisa too." Sarah nodded. "It's come full circle." "That's how kindness works," James said. "It keeps moving forward, touching more lives." A year ago, on Sarah's birthday, James had given her a framed photograph. It showed the bench where they had first met. Under the photo were these words: "Every journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Every river begins with a single drop. Every symphony begins with a single note. And sometimes, a whole new life begins with a simple sandwich." Sarah kept the photo on her desk at the center. It reminded her every day that no act of kindness was ever too small to matter. Outside, the first stars appeared in the evening sky. Inside the Hope Center, people who had once been invisible now slept in warm beds, their bellies full, their dignity restored. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new chances to help. "Ready for tomorrow?" James asked. Sarah smiled. "Always. There's always someone new sitting on a bench somewhere, waiting to be seen." James nodded. "And thanks to you, there will always be someone ready to see them."